You know, when we talk about the incredible history of ancient Indian philosophy, there's this one thread, a thread that someone, somewhere, tried very hard to cut out and hide. Today, we're going to pull on that thread and uncover a school of thought so radical, so rebellious, it was almost completely erased.
Okay, so let me ask you, when I say ancient Indian philosophy, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's a set of core ideas that have shaped spiritual traditions for thousands of years. I'm guessing you're probably thinking about things like karma, right? The whole cycle of reincarnation, the idea of an eternal soul, the Atman, and, of course, the big one, the authority of the sacred texts, the Vedas. These are really the pillars of what we think of as mainstream Indian thought. Okay, got all that in your head? Good. Now I want you to just forget all of it. Seriously. Just for the next few minutes, let's wipe this slate clean. Because we're about to meet a group of thinkers who looked at all those ideas and basically said, yeah, no, we don't buy any of it. So let's dive in and meet these rebels. We're talking about a school of philosophy that took that entire spiritual framework and just challenged every single part of it. They were the original skeptics of ancient India, and they were not shy about it. So who were they? Well, they were called the Cārvākas, or sometimes the Lokāyata. And that name, Lokāyata, is actually super interesting. It literally means philosophy of the people. See, this wasn't some complex, high-minded system meant for priests and ascetics. Nope, this was a philosophy for the real world, grounded in everyday life. You know, their whole philosophy often gets boiled down to this one simple, pretty direct motto. And it makes sense, right? If you believe there's no afterlife, no divine judgment, no soul that needs saving, what's left? Just this life, right here, right now. So for them, the only logical thing to do was to embrace it. Okay, so if the Cārvākas threw out everything spiritual, what did they actually believe was real? Their answer was, well, it was brilliantly and kind of brutally simple. For them, the entire universe, and I mean everything from a tiny pebble to a human being, was made of just 4 basic things you could actually experience: earth, water, fire, and air. Now, you might know that a lot of other philosophies included a 5th element, ether or akasa. The Cārvākas, they rejected it. Why? Simple. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. So for them, it wasn't real. And that's it. Seriously. That's the whole list. If you couldn't perceive it with your senses, it just didn't exist. So in their world, there was zero room for a god, an immortal soul, a heaven, or any kind of life after death. The world was just what was right in front of you. Okay, so this obviously brings up a huge question, right? It's the one their critics always hammer them on. If we're all just a bunch of material stuff, earth, water, fire, air, then where does consciousness come from? How does inanimate matter start thinking? And their answer was just brilliant, so practical. They said consciousness is what we'd now call an emergent property. They use this great analogy. Think about chewing betel leaf, nut, and catechu. None of those things are red on their own, right? But when you combine them in your mouth, boom, you get this vibrant red color. Consciousness, they said, is exactly like that. It just emerges when you get the right combination of material elements together in a living body. And they actually had a formal name for this theory, Dhahatmavad. It's a really straightforward idea. The soul, or Atman, isn't some separate, spooky spiritual entity. The soul is just the living body itself, but with the quality of being conscious. And to back this up, they didn't use some ancient text. They used common sense. They'd point out really practical, observable things. Like, think about it. When you eat well and nourish your body, your mind feels sharper, right? And when your body gets sick, your thinking gets all foggy. And when you say something like, I am tired, you're not talking about just your mind or just your body. The I is the whole package. So this all leads to a really crucial question. If their view of reality was so strict, how did they decide what was actually true and what wasn't? Well, it all came down to a theory of knowledge that was just as strict. For the Cārvākas, if you wanted to know something for sure, if you wanted to know if it was real, there was only one way to do it. Just one. While other philosophies had this whole menu of ways to find proof, the Cārvākas said, nope, there's only one that's reliable. And that one single path was perception. The Sanskrit word is Pratyakṣa. The idea is simple. If you can directly experience something with your senses, see it, hear it, touch it, then and only then can you know it's real. Everything else, it's either a guess or it's just plain made up. Okay, and this is a really important distinction to make.
they weren't totally against inference, not for everyday stuff. For example, if you see smoke on a hill, it's perfectly logical to infer there's a fire. Why? Because you've perceived both smoke and fire before. You know they go together. But what they completely rejected was using that same logic to try and prove things you could never perceive. Things like a god, or a soul, or an afterlife. And as for what was written in the scriptures, to them, that was just testimony, basically hearsay, totally unreliable as a source of truth. So let's kind of put all these pieces together. You've got no gods to worry about, no karmic debt to pay off, and no afterlife to prep for. So how should you live? What does that mean for your day-to-day life? Well, as you can imagine, it leads to a very, very different kind of ethics. Their ethics flow directly from their worldview. It's just logical, really. If this is the one and only life you've got, why on earth would you spend it suffering now for some promised reward in a fantasy land later? They argued that pleasure is the highest good. Our main goal should be to maximize our own happiness and well-being, right here, right now. And all those duties and virtues you read about in religious texts, they saw them as empty promises, basically designed to distract you from the real, tangible joys of life. And this naturally led them to be incredibly critical of organized religion. They were especially harsh on the priestly class. They argued that all these complicated rituals and sacrifices weren't really about pleasing gods at all. They saw it as a clever business model, a way for priests to make a good living by exploiting the fears and ignorance of ordinary people. Now, as you can probably guess, a philosophy that calls priests hypocrites and flat out denies the existence of God and the soul, well, that wasn't exactly going to make you popular with the powers that be. And it didn't. Yeah, they were consistently pushed to the margins. Branded as heretics, the Sanskrit term is Nastika. Even their original name, Lokāyata, which meant philosophy of the people, got twisted over time. It eventually became a slur, a derogatory term for someone who uses tricky, empty arguments. In some of the earliest texts, they're just dismissed as scoffers. But their journey through history is just fascinating when you look at it. They started out as these scoffers, just questioning rituals. Then they became a formal school called Lokāyata, and later they got the name Cārvāka. But here is the incredible twist. After centuries of being dismissed as just a bunch of simple hedonists, modern scholars are looking at them in a totally new light. They're now being recognized as some of the earliest pioneers of scientific empiricism. I mean, their core idea that real knowledge has to come from direct, perceivable evidence, that's the foundation of modern science. And they were talking about it more than 1,000 years before it took hold in Europe. It's pretty amazing. So the Cārvākas were almost completely written out of history. Their original texts were destroyed, their name was turned into an insult, and yet their central idea to trust evidence over belief is maybe more relevant today than ever before. Which kind of leaves us with a big question to think about. In a world that's still so full of unseen beliefs, what is the power, and maybe what is the peril, of a philosophy that trusts only what it can see?